Okay, now that we have a basic understanding of the terminology and kind of an overview of what is strategic management of technology, we'll start drilling a little bit deeper into internal strategies for innovation. Now, I know there are 3 chapters to review, but I think it's important that we do them all together. So pace yourself and review the PowerPoints. I think that will help too. But basically, when you look at innovation, it's important to look at it in 3 steps in terms of planning, and then in terms of implementing, and then evaluating and control. So each of those 3 chapters look at each of those particular aspects of innovation. So chapter 3, pros and cons of internal innovation. And when you talk about innovation, we talk about how firms create new technology, products, or processes. Now, before you even start, the decision is it worth the time and effort to innovate and to create your own product, or is it easier to purchase someone else's technology and to either modify it or use it? Now, there are millions of examples on both sides of those. Companies that have innovated. It's a real simple one as I'm kind of looking at the computer here. When you think of the first Macintosh and the use of icons, graphic user interface, that was really an innovation, depending on how you look at it. Some people say it came from, I think, Xerox or some other, technologies. But the impact of that spurred the change of PCs to go to Windows, to a very similar interface. Who developed it? Okay, who used it first? iPhones versus Android. There's great debate and talk about who stole what from whom, if you will. So, as a manager, when you look strategically at a product or a product expansion, first, do you innovate or don't you innovate? Is it worth the time and effort? If it is, then the focus is really on planning initially. Okay, so what is the vision? What is the mission? What are the goals and objectives? What is your strategy? What are the tactics and actions that you need to specify to get to that point? I like the 5 key characteristics from IBM. Talks about ensuring the identification of strategic issues. The innovation must have some market potential. When you look at ensuring that strategic planners are focused on critical applications, leaves the biases out of the analysis. Structuring an ongoing process for top management regularly to examine strategic challenges. How do you plan to plan for the future, not just analyze? Crisis management we talk about sometimes. We deal with the fires, but we don't deal with the planning and moving forward. Connecting strategic planning to resource allocation. You got to put your money and your people where your goals are, or it's not going to work. And then promote widespread support and involvement in the entire process. You never know where the ideas are going to come from. There's a lot of creativity in terms of innovation. The reflective response this week talks about the 6 characteristics of truly creative people. Are you a creative person? Some people say it can be learned. Some people say it can be developed. Some people say it's a natural thing. Look at yourself. Are you into adventuring, confronting? What are your skills? How do politics play into innovation? And then finally, what are the technology stages in planning? The startup, growth, maturity, decline. Some good graphic charts in this chapter, I think, that look at each of these. How do you develop that climate for innovation? And then how do you develop the right climate? Okay, so once you've gone through the planning, then you move into implementation. That's what Chapter 4 looks like. How do you organize systems, structures, people, and processes into consistent synergistic wholes to achieve your goal? What are the implementation issues? I think the chapter does a pretty good job. If you look at figure 4.2, leadership must ensure that there's a cooperative spirit, a cooperative behavior, a culture of collaboration. How do you foster that as a leader? How do you foster that as a manager? How do you create that supportive environment? How do you create mechanisms? How do you engage people? And then how do you move into extending that? How do you look at providing sufficient knowledge of products and market competencies so that new ideas can come through? How do your products align? How do you craft your portfolio of innovation? Those are all real keys to looking at it. How do you avoid the pitfalls of implementing an innovative strategy? How do you avoid that risk of applying process innovations too broadly? How do you overlook people challenges associated with changes? You make a major change in a company. How is that going to affect your workforce? Is it going to result in a loss of workforce? Is it going to result in changes in personnel? Are you going to have to retrain? What do you do? How do you move forward? How do you avoid being overconfident in your ability to lead change? How can you avoid elimination of processes? And then how can you avoid failing to communicate? I think communication is so key in management and leadership, and especially in terms of technology, where you are in some cases really shaking things up a little bit. If you don't communicate effectively, if you don't get people on the same page, if you don't provide good training resources, you can be in real trouble. Chapter 5 looks at evaluation and controls. How do you know that you've achieved the outcome? For a long time, especially in education, faculty would say, I know my students are learning. And there was not a whole lot of alignment between how do you assess that? How do you use measurable specific outcomes and evaluate them? I think we've learned a lot in terms of education over the last few years. Some of it comes from the industry model, and sometimes that's not a good thing. You can't treat people like products, but in some cases, I think it's important that no matter what you do, whether it's internal innovation, whether it's education, whether it's even working with external groups, that you focus on evaluation. How do you know you're making progress toward the goal? How do you put controls in place to help you determine what to do if you are not meeting your goals, if you're not going where you think your progress is. And really, evaluation control starts right in the planning and implementation stage. How do you evaluate whether your planning is effective? How do you evaluate whether your implementation is effective? Chapter 5 really does a lot of discussion and hopefully give you something to think about. Where are we now? What lies ahead? Where are we going? And where will we end up if we continue on this path? That's really what evaluation is. And then how do we work on control? How do you look at whether the financial controls, whether there's business processes that need to be rethought? What are the key decisions you need to make? Who's involved? Top management, divisional management, department managers, team managers. How do you get input from all of those groups? Deming's 14 points of quality control is one way of looking at it, and I think it's a pretty good one, talking about constancy of purpose, looking at moving toward a single supplier, improving constantly, eliminating management by objective, which sounds like a contradiction of what I was saying before about assessment, but if you're only looking at the numbers, that could be a problem. What's the bigger picture? When we talked about the S-curves and Utterback and Abernathy and how things change, sometimes you have to have a lost leader. Sometimes you have to expect a slower integration in terms of technology. And how do you implement evaluation and control? That's the other section here. So think this week, reflect on the readings. One of the discussion basically this week is to again try to find an article or website, don't forget the citations, that provides some guidelines for evaluation and control, but also addresses all the planning and implementation stage. And then rather than an action paper this week, there's just a quick case study that's from the India, I don't have it in front of me here, IOLC. Hang on a sec. Yeah, Indian Organic Chemicals Limited. Take a look at the case study. What processes would you look at, and what steps should IOLC take to continue its success? Just think in terms of maybe even some cultural controls. For this paper, use APA again, but basically in terms of APA, times New Roman 12, 1-inch margins, that sort of thing. And again, if you do some citations, do it. This doesn't have to be really long. Just address the questions and reflect for it. By this week, I should also have from each of you your final paper topic and which option you're going to use. And again, if you want to select your group, this is probably the deadline to do that. I'll post the groups this week for the week 4 business plan project. As always, any questions, comments, and concerns, shoot me an email, and I look forward to reading your case studies, your discussions, and your reflections on internal innovation. Have a good week.